And thanks for coming out on a lovely evening, as Nancy pointed out. About 3 weeks ago, I was asked to do lead a series of roundtable discussions on the issue of equity and fairness and carbon pricing. I had about the same amount of talking time allotted to me, and after about the second of the three sessions, I realized that people were being sucked down the rabbit hole of the technicalities of pricing, and I was frustrated because I was leading them down that rabbit hole, even though what I really wanted to say to them was, there's really essentially two questions about carbon pricing and climate policy, and the questions are, will it work and is it fair? And so I'll start today by simply saying, if you don't remember anything else that I say today, and you probably won't, try to remember, will it work and is it fair? And just to give an idea of how important the will it work part is, I mean, I think we all know what a significant challenge, as well as an opportunity to overcome years of carbon pollution that we are given. But just to give it a context, James Hansen, a leading climate scientist from NASA in the US, basically gives us less than 10 years to take the steps that we need to make a difference and to be sure that they're the right ones, or he says we'll just be over the tipping point and it will be too late. So whatever we decide, better work. And just to give a sense of urgency to the challenge, the legislation says 80% by 2050, but if we're actually going to make a difference in the world and we're going to stand for equitability so that we're not consuming or emitting more carbon than people in developing nations. In British Columbia and Canada, we probably really need to be aiming for 94%. So let me talk, coming out of the election, a little bit about the carbon tax and some of the problems that I and the Sierra Club see with the carbon tax, which is not to say that we don't think the carbon tax has a role. But briefly, problems are the carbon tax is essentially a market mechanism, and notwithstanding what we sometimes hear, the market is not a magic bullet to solve problems. Just look at what our recent experience with financial instruments leading to a recession is. The market is also imprecise. For instance, in the summer following the introduction of the carbon tax, we saw gas prices rise and fall something like 20 times the actual amount of the tax. So while it does have a role, and the roles I would say it has are twofold, it can certainly spur creativity and innovation, which is very necessary. And it also serves a very important role of raising people's awareness about the cost of what they're consuming and what goes into what they're consuming. So it plays a strong educative role. In and of itself, it can't make the difference it needs to be. This tax in particular, I believe, has some significant flaws. One of them is that it's not high enough to make the difference we're talking about. It would have to probably be, some people say, as low as 4 times higher, but probably 10 times higher. And that raises the question of, will any government bring it in? But the other problem is the widespread acceptance of the notion that it needed to be revenue neutral. In other words, that it had to be offset with income tax and corporate tax cuts in order to be politically acceptable to the population at large. A, I don't agree with that. B, I think it creates gross inequities. And C, my experience is, and granted I can't back this up with any scientific studies, is that if British Columbians and Canadians actually know where their tax dollars are going, they don't mind paying for it. Look at municipal referenda where you're asked, are you willing to pay a tax increase for a library or a swimming pool? The answer is, if not universally, certainly overwhelmingly yes. So the effect of this particular carbon tax in its current model in British Columbia is that by year 3, the highest 20% of income earners in BC are actually going to be saving more from tax cuts than they will pay in carbon tax, even if they make absolutely no change in their behavior whatsoever. The other 80%, on the other hand, will be paying significantly more unless they make massive cuts in their consumption patterns. And the other problem with this model is that the richest 20% are overwhelmingly the largest users of carbon, whether it's through larger houses, summer cottages, airplane travel, larger vehicles, two vehicles. So you effectively, with the tax alone, are arguably raising their awareness, but you're not actually giving them a financial incentive to make the change that's necessary. The only other thing I'd say about the argument about revenue neutrality versus other ways of spending the income from either the auctioning or sale of emission permits or a carbon tax is that let's call it what it is. If you're saying that revenue neutrality means that you have to give tax cuts and that's the only way the income can be offset, what you're really saying is you're relying solely on the market and individual actions to make change. And if you're saying that some or a large percentage of that money should be used for investing in transit, investing in infrastructure, investing in research and development, or providing low-interest loans or subsidies or tax credits to low-income people to assist them to use alternate modes of transportation, engage in energy retrofitting, you're actually saying you believe in some degree of collective and government responsibility together to reach a solution rather than leaving it up to individuals. Over the course of the election, there was a very interesting debate, not just in the province, but actually going on between environmental groups. And while it was sometimes portrayed as a rift, I would say that actually it was a very interesting discussion that led to some shifting in position. So in the middle of the election campaign, a number of environmental organizations, including Sierra Club, but also including Forest Ethics, BC Sustainable Energy, West Coast Environmental Law, put out a broad-based email to all of our supporters that actually called on whoever won the election to devote a much larger portion of the revenue from the carbon tax to transit, to low-income supports, and to energy retrofitting, rather than devoting it all to revenue-neutral income tax cuts. So that is an evolution and development in thinking through discussion, and I would say is a significant challenge for the environmental and social movements over the coming months and years to work hard to change the public view as well as the government view of what the appropriate use, whether in whole or in part, of revenues from carbon taxes or emission permits should be. The other, and I'll simply add that Lower Mainland mayors, just prior to the election, actually called for carbon tax revenue to be used to subsidize public transit. This was a very significant municipal united call on government to actually shift that significant part of their carbon tax policy. The other challenge we face is to acknowledge the leadership of the government on the one hand and the important symbolism of the carbon tax being a carbon pricing mechanism versus what I can only term as climate contradictory policies, because this government is also continues to promote oil and gas development, the transportation of dirty oil across the north and down the coast that comes from Alberta, and encourages the building of roads, which encourages people to take more vehicles on the roads and emit more carbon. I think we have to find a way out of these contradictions to a more consistent policy if we're going to make the difference that we need to make. Other challenges that we face are the United States is certainly going to bring in some form of cap and trade bill, the Waxman-Markey bill. It remains to be seen what will be in it, but one thing that's emerging from the United States is there's really not much interest in a North American system, and part of the reason for that is the rise of protectionist sentiment in the United States. So we in Canada not only have to devise something that matches what the United States implements, or if it's not strong enough, hopefully we will introduce something in Canada that is strong enough, but we have to ensure that it doesn't put us at an economic disadvantage in addition to the challenges that we'll face in terms of pricing carbon and introducing the kinds of economic shifts we need to make. The other thing I think we have to get our heads around collectively in society is it's not simply a matter of assuming that magically emissions will go down and we will be able to continue with the kind of economy that we have. we fundamentally need a very different economy. We need an economy that's based on green and sustainable industry and jobs. And while we're transiting to that economy, we need to ensure that we do it in a way that is fair, in a way that provides training and transition for both workers and industries that are impacted. And we also need to understand that it doesn't matter what we do in the north. If developing countries don't develop with green, low-carbon emitting energy sources, then we're still stuck with the same problem. And if we want and expect them to do it, we need to realize that after living very well off much of their resources for much of the last century, we need to take much greater responsibility for supporting, in some way subsidizing their development and ensuring that that people in the South aren't told that, well, you've never lived with the level of development that we have in the North, so therefore you can live with consuming less carbon than we can because, frankly, we're used to it. And finally, I would simply close by saying that if we want to succeed, we need public acceptance. That part of people's assumption about, although I didn't agree with the adoption of revenue neutrality, I think the assumption that the public needed to accept measures is correct. And therefore, I would say that as we implement policy and carbon pricing, we have to ensure that we don't have winners, i.e. the wealthiest in society or the developed nations, while other people lose. Or, as the CCPA put, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, we simply price lower income people out of the ability to make the changes in their own lifestyle that they need to make if we're going to meet the target, and that they want to make because they want to leave a better world for their kids, but they can't make because they don't have the money to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. I'm sure you've sparked some interest, and there's some questions for your panelists that will come up a little later. But I'll also, at this point, just entertain a couple of more questions from the audience, if there are any, before I move on to Bond. Yes.
It's been implemented across the vehicles that have an engine capacity greater than 1.3 litre will be taxed progressively higher, so that people that drive 2.5 litre, 5 litre diesels, etc. will be paying far more. Why wasn't this considered in BC?
Well, I can't say why it wasn't considered because I wasn't in the very closed room in which is another problem with the government developing policy. It's not very open and transparent. It involves a small number of people, and therefore others don't actually know how the decisions are reached. But I would say that while that is a sensible policy, if we want it to succeed, I think we have to realize that there will be people who have vehicles larger than that who may want to switch, and we have to make it possible for people without the financial means to do it. There are a variety of ways to do that. One of them is grants. Another way is loans in which the repayment schedule is tailored to actually match the fuel savings that people realize. So it's not free money. They do pay it back, but they're able to pay it back out of the savings they realized by making the switch in the first place. So there's a variety of ways, if that was a government policy, for us to reach it across the board and not simply through luck of the draw or actually luck of the pocketbook.
Thanks. Is there one more question?
There's one there. Yes.
So many countries coming along, like India and China, basically BRICS and POC basically needing a lot more subsidies in order to support their infrastructure and to create this green society. And already having a lack in here and being able to pass certain laws or get passed create a green society. How do you foresee finding subsidies to support these massive populations?
I'm sorry, I can't hear the question, but there is a microphone right there.
Hello? Okay, sorry about that. So basically the question is with these, I'm sure everybody's familiar with BRICS and all these countries coming online with obviously a massive population. And us already having a hard time supporting ourselves becoming a green society, how do you foresee us subsidizing these other countries that will have these massive populations?
It's an excellent question. I'm not going to pretend to be an economist and have the answer, but I will say that we don't have any choice, because if we don't find a way to do it, and I believe that we can, then it doesn't matter what we do here. Other countries will look at us and say, you had your turn. We are not prepared to have our people live in poverty. We're going to develop an economy, and it will clearly be self-defeating, but it will have massive negative ramifications for everybody in those countries, in our country, whether it's through the effects of climate change or the influx of climate refugees who are fleeing drought-stricken countries. So the real, I think, answer is we can't afford not to find a way, and when we can't afford not to find a way, we'll find a way.
Thank you, George. So our next